welcome everybody. I hope you all received my email this morning. There's some, the summary and a schedule of what we're going to be doing both today and throughout the next few weeks. And of course, a little bit of information about Sports Recovery Tracker, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And I'll thank you all, of course, for registering and just in general that, typically anytime, whether I'm doing a live coaching course or an online course or anything that I'm delivering, I'll always try to take a little bit of time just to thank, all of you. I am, of course, a coach myself, and I am, I have been and am continuing to take courses and, more or less, I would say I'm more or less of a lifelong student. I'm finishing up my, my PhD now, and I'm 40 years old. So, I totally understand and respect and value, the commitment that you make, that we all make to do these things. You're taking time, away from, from your work, from your coaching work, from your other work. If you have other work, you're taking time away from school and family and so on. And, of course, there's a small fee attached to this course as well. So thank you, for your commitment and everything. And I do hope that you do get a lot of value from this. So let's get started. The topic is high performance training, how to plan, test, train, and monitor your athletes. That's a broad topic. And we have about an hour, I've given it for an hour, till an hour and a half. I'd like to have some time for questions and answers. So let's see, we have an hour and 10 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes. Each one of these topics, that's planning training, testing athletes, conducting physical fitness training with a team or with athletes, and monitoring. Each one could be several hours. It could even be a college or university course. As a matter of fact, there is a college course that I teach right now called Prescription for Performance, which is all about planning training. And there's a university course that I'm also teaching, which is more or less getting into the physiology of energy system training. So these are broad topics. We can't really give maybe as much attention to each of them as they deserve, but I think it's a pretty good little condensed version. So some of you, if you have an exercise science background, I know a few of you do, that's great. If not, I think this is a good kind of introductory course to introduce you to the concepts, and then there's lots of other directions you can go from there if you want more information. So it's a broad topic. I'm giving you more or less the most important things, what you need to know as a coach in order to, to do these things to the best of your ability to optimize the training and testing and overall physical program that you deliver to your players. Okay, so the outline for today, we're going to start by talking about periodization, and really that revolves around this concept of training load and being able to plan training load in order to optimize performance. So that's part one. Part two is about fitness assessments. We're going to discuss, a little bit these concepts of validity, reliability, and reproducibility, why they're so important, and why you need to look into selecting fitness test protocols or fitness assessment protocols that meet those criteria, or you probably shouldn't do them. Part three, we're going to talk about training, and I'm calling it the soccer fitness way. Of course, that's my my company, my original company, and we developed a model around physical fitness training for soccer players, and eventually then branched out into other sports and other athletes. But this is the the model that we're going to talk about. And then finally, monitoring. I call it putting the pieces together. And hopefully we'll get a good idea as to specifically why monitoring is so important. And I'll hint at it, but I think maybe monitoring is probably one of the missing pieces with regards to the work that you do as a coach or as a fitness coach. And I'm gonna just stop there because that's one concept. And I want to ask you, what do you think? Maybe you've seen some stuff that I've put out there before, or other people have said, but we're all, we're all coaches here. Okay, so I'm going to ask, and anyone, and please, for this, unmute yourself. I'd like you to, if you can, speak, and if not, you can use the chat, of course, if you don't want to. But I'd like to see if you're comfortable, you can speak. You are a coach. Are you also a fitness coach? What do you think? Yes or no, and why? Anybody? Don't be shy. Okay, someone's in the chat there. Oh, okay. There's no speak option. No problem. Okay. So tell me in the chat then, John Michael. Are you also a fitness coach if you're a coach? Okay. Of course. Gyro says yes. All right. And I see a few others. Okay, so that's good. So the way we need to think about this as coaches, and again, I've maybe put some stuff out there that maybe you've seen before. Okay, but the idea is that if you're a coach working with a team, unless you are in a professional club, national team, possibly some university environments, but not really all the time anyway, even in university. And I can say honestly, sometimes not even in the professional game do you have this. But unless you're at those top levels, you don't have a fitness coach or a sports scientist working with you all the time. Okay, and that's something to keep in mind, that because you don't have that person working with you all the time, who is it that's responsible for planning training, for delivering, let's say, the physical component of training, and for monitoring the results of that plan and that training? The only person is you. So whether you like it or not, you are a fitness coach. And as I said, some of you, I think you actually have some background, maybe working as a fitness coach, or you have an exercise science background. I think some of the people in this course do, but others maybe don't. But even if you don't, you still are a fitness coach, because you don't have a fitness coach working there with you. So the responsibility to learn how to do these things, it falls on your shoulders. I'm just checking back to the chat because I see some more notifications coming. Okay, Max says, make sure to select all panelists, all right, for all of us to see you. Yeah, that's right. And Gyro says again, yeah, you're the total package. You have to be, and you should be, Max. You're right. You're both, Ludovic. Okay, so very good. So I'm glad that we've got that concept. You have to start thinking of yourself, even as I say, whether you like it or not. I'm not saying that to come off as condescending or whatever, but it's just to get you into that mindset that yes, you are a fitness coach, because you have to think about the physical component of the exercises that you're doing with your team, because if you don't, then it means you're going to make one out of two mistakes that I would say, in my own experience, I see most coaches in Ontario and Canada are making. And I just put my hands up here on the top of the screen. You can see, this is just a simple way to think about it. Okay. This line here, this high line up here at the top, we can call this overtraining. That's where the training load you give to your players is too high. And if you do that, eventually you're going to get sickness or injury. So that's overtraining, sickness or injury. And then down here, the bottom line, okay, that's undertraining. That's where the training load is too low. And if you make that mistake, then that means that your players don't improve. So, this is more or less is what I see a lot of. I've been all over the country. I've been all over the world, but I've tested players from all over the country at many different levels. Most of them aren't in shape. Most of them are not, their fitness is low. Why is their fitness low? It's probably a lot more because of, under training. They're not training hard enough. And probably, again, this is my opinion. I can't quantify it necessarily. No one has studied it yet. Okay. But probably the reason that they're under training is because the coaches are not putting enough attention into the physical component to their training. And that's probably because a lot of coaches, not you guys, but a lot of coaches probably, don't necessarily think of themselves as fitness coaches. Okay, so with that out of the way, I don't know if I'm hearing, is that John or Valerio there? No, okay. Can you all still hear me and see me here? Huh. Okay, I think I'm still here. All right, so I'll go ahead and move on. Let's get started. Oh, who's in the chat here now? Okay, can't see you right now. Now I can. Okay, all right, that's all right. Doesn't really matter if you can see me. I think that's just maybe Valerio who's logged in now through our account as well, but that's all good. As long as you can still hear me, then we're all good. So let's go ahead and get started now with part one. So we're going to talk about periodization, planning of training load, okay? To start with, I'm going to give you a quote. This is the quote, okay? Anyone in the chat or the Q&A, you can guess who is it that came up with this quote? Planning training is not simply a science, it is an art. Anybody knows? This one might be, there's going to be a few quotes, by the way, in this lesson today. This is the first one, so this might be the hardest one to guess, but let's see if anyone can figure out who said this. Give you another 5 seconds if anybody wants to guess. Jose Mourinho. Wow. Well, you know what? That's an excellent guess, Alan. Unfortunately, it wasn't Mourinho. It might have been, but in any case, I'm crediting myself with that one. So that's something I've in my own courses that I teach, and I've been using this for a long time. I'm welcome for you to prove me wrong. If Mourinho said it, I'll take my name off. I'll put it in there. But it's not just a science; it's an art. Now, what do I mean by that? There are scientific principles that you really should follow when you're planning training, because if you don't, you might make one of those two mistakes. Again, that overtraining or undertraining. But there isn't just one way for you to deliver fitness training. There are hundreds of ways. There's probably even thousands of ways. So the idea behind this quote is that it is an art. There's a lot of variation in terms of what you can do for your players to achieve the same result. So I hope that makes sense to you, and I want you to always keep that in mind. This course is not designed in order to give you a practice plan. You have a certain number of sessions or type of sessions or whatever, and you just go ahead and run all of those sessions with your team. That's not the intention of this course, okay? This course is designed to show you principles and give you examples, and then hopefully you'll have a better understanding about how to do this stuff yourself. So keep that in mind. It's not a science, simply a science. There is science involved, but it's also an art. So we'll talk about periodization. This is a fancy word. We're going to try to give you a simple definition. The systematic planning of athletic or physical training. The aim originally of all the science around periodization was in order to have athletes reach their best possible performance level, their peak level of physical performance for the most important competition of the year. And it involves cycling of various aspects of a training program during a specific period. I mentioned that second point here about the most important competition of the year because I have to ask you, and again, just tell me in the chat, okay? In soccer, is there one most important competition in the year? What do you think? Gyro? No? Is that zero? I don't know if that means, does that mean no? Wellesley, no? Not in youth development? Okay, so I'll challenge you to think of it this way. It's unlikely that you are ever going to find, whether it's youth, senior, college, whatever it is, that you're ever going to be able to really say, if you look at the competition schedule, this one game is the most important competition of the year. I mean, you might be able to say, well, okay, you know what, in soccer, it's the World Cup. Fine. But the World Cup, if you win it, you need 7 games. And of course, before you can do that, you have to qualify. And, qualification sometimes takes a long time, and there's many games involved, right? So no matter what, yeah, okay, so Max says tapering might apply. Okay, I agree with you, okay? But I guess the way I want you to think about this is team sports where the seasons are long and there's multiple competitions throughout the year. In team sports, there really isn't one most important competition in the year. There's many. And this science that we're going to talk about, it was not developed for team sports. It was developed for individual sports. The original sports scientists that developed periodization, most were from the Soviet Union. So we're talking 70s and 80s. And primarily they were focused on developing athletes in the individual, a lot of the sports that are done in the Olympics, track and field, swimming, weightlifting, etc. And in those sports, typically every year there's like one big competition, maybe the World Championships. If it's an Olympic year, maybe there's the qualifiers for the Olympics and then the Olympics themselves. And so what it means is that the athletes in those sports, they are capable of getting to their peak level of fitness over the course of, let's say, the Olympic Games, which is, maybe a 10-day period for them or something. It's a short window of time. You can maintain peak fitness in a short window of time. But in soccer, because there's so many games throughout the year that are important, you cannot look at one, short window of time and say this is the most important time. So you have to maximize fitness as much as you can, but really the goal isn't necessarily peak fitness in soccer, it's maintenance of fitness. And maintenance of fitness involves really two things. Number one, of course, you need to keep training and training at the right intensity for sure, so you don't lose fitness. But the other thing, and this is where, I'm going to ask you, maybe some of you that are watching a lot of the big leagues in Italy, England, Spain, etc., is there anything else that let's say commentators or people in the media might talk about regarding physical fitness of players, and specifically when they speak about fitness coaches or physiotherapists and physicians, etc.? Maintaining a high level of performance is one. What's the other? What's the other really important thing that you need to think about throughout the season? Hopefully, not getting injured, John. Absolutely. That's it. Not getting injured. Okay. And you might even see statistics put up there about, number of players that have been lost to injury throughout the year. Or if we're talking about maybe a specific player, you might see number of games that a specific player has been out due to injury. So really, again, the responsibility right at the top level, it falls on the fitness coach, the sports scientist, in order to maximize performance, right? Maximize physical fitness as much as possible and minimize the risk of injury. But at all other levels, because you don't have a fitness coach with you all the time, the responsibility is on you. So if your player's fitness isn't good enough, that's under training. And if you got players, getting hurt all the time, it means that you've got some problem with training load. You're going to have to reduce it. So that's the idea, just to be clear on that. Okay, the science was developed for individual sports, but we are applying that science now to team sports. Okay, it's a little bit different. So let's move on. These are three key principles that you need to understand in order to really have a good understanding of periodization and how to plan training. And the first is the principle of overload. Essentially what that means is that any system, we're going to talk a little bit about energy systems. There's also the muscular system. You can think of strength and power and agility, all these things. You need a stimulus that overloads it in some way. Okay, you can see this little arm wrestling match. It's the guy on the right who's being overloaded there. His muscles are going to be stimulated to grow in order to meet that resistance. That's the way our body works. Our body has this amazing physiological ability. It's a self-protective mechanism. So if you apply a stimulus that gives it a little bit of an overload, you got to push yourself in training to do that. But if you apply a stimulus that gives you a bit of an overload, the body responds by adapting. Muscles get stronger. Any of you that have maybe again a bit of a sports science background, that you develop a better ability to transport oxygen. You get more mitochondria in your muscle cells, and so these adaptations are only going to be stimulated if you have an overload. So you've got to be clear on that. If you don't have an overload, you're not training hard enough, you're never going to see improvements. Okay, so that's the first principle. Here's the second one, specificity. So the stimuli that you apply to each system is going to elicit adaptations which match or are specific to these stimuli. I'm going to ask another question. Tell me in the chat. If you train soccer players with cycling, are they going to get the same type of benefits to their aerobic fitness as if you train them with running? What do you think? Yes or no? Right away, I'm seeing answers. Yeah, I'm hinting. No, absolutely no. Right, Max, Alan, absolutely. Because the muscles work differently in cycling than they do when running. And now I'm going to challenge you a little bit more. And I don't want to come off as a hypocrite here, because we have, we do lots of running training in my facility. And not to say that running training is not important. It is. But if you look at the actual adaptations that come from aerobic training, you compare running to playing soccer in a structured way, small-sided games, etc. Which one is more specific, and which one is going to lead to more specific adaptations, running or soccer? Small-sided games, soccer, absolutely. So we're on the right track with that. That's good. Okay, we have to understand that. It doesn't mean that just because you go and play soccer in your training sessions, you should, but it doesn't mean that just because you do that, you're going to get the adaptations you need. For that, you need overload. And really, the point of all this is that in order to make sure you're getting the right overload, you're going to have to monitor. So we'll talk about that one. That's why I say putting the pieces together. But you have to understand adaptations that come are specific. So the most specific way, of course, is to play the game. Okay, and finally, progression or progressive overload is the final principle. Okay, to elicit positive adaptations without the risk of sickness or injury, you must present overloads progressively. This guy, this person is walking up a staircase. What would happen? I'll draw on the screen if I can here. What would happen if I knock out these 3 steps and I tell him that, in training, he has to get from here to here in 1 week, let's say? What would happen? Tell me in the chat. Is that possible to do you think? Anybody? You gotta be brave here. High injury risk. He'd fail. He'd fall. Okay, so I like this. It's an oversimplification, of course, but you can think of each of these steps as a small increase in overload. So if you make small increases in load or overload every week, every phase, every cycle, then you've got a nice, linear progression. It's easy to do. But if you knock them out, you start at a certain level and then you just jump to a high level, that's when the risk of sickness and injury goes up. And, I'm glad, you guys, again, you picked up on it. That's great. Okay. Again, it's a bit of an oversimplification, but okay, this sounds like common sense, but I'm going to challenge you to look at in the environments you're in. I mean, I don't know if anybody's working in university soccer. I think this is a great example. What do we do to players coming out of high school immediately in training camp? In university training camp. It's a little crazy now because of COVID, but what's the typical way that it works? You graduate high school, you got your summer, whatever it is, and then you start university soccer around the middle of August. What happens? What do we do with their training load? Testing. Okay, John Michael, I agree. But then what happens when you start training? Do you think there's a gradual increase in overload? Highest load it's ever been. I agree with you. I agree. I know, yeah, maybe some of you guys have lived through it. I did. I mean, I went from, club soccer to university, 2 practices a day in the heat against, you're only 19 years old. You're with guys that are 3-4 years older than you. They're bigger, stronger. It looks like this, doesn't it, John Michael? It looks like that, right? Do you agree with me? Yeah, 4 practices a week to 2 practices a day. So as I said, this sounds like common sense. It makes sense, but we don't always do this, and we don't always work in environments where coaches do this. So this is, I'll tell you, it's the reason why I created the courses, the courses that I teach. It's the reason why I'm really, passionate about this topic, because if we want to do better with our training, we have to understand this principle of progression. So I hope it makes sense. Okay, let's move on. So we'll talk about, well, what are we planning for? What specifically are we planning for? And again, this is we're going to go through this quickly, but these are the 3 energy systems that you use in the game, 3 of them. The anaerobic alactic system, okay? This system provides energy for the following types of exercise or movement that are done all the time in soccer. Short duration, high intensity. Okay, it depends on the level. It depends on the game and the tactics and everything. But players perform typically hundreds of these short duration, high intensity actions in a game. Sprints, fast runs, tackles, challenges for balls in the air, changes of direction, and so on. You can understand. Anyone who's played the game, you understand. Lots of these actions happen. The energy is provided by the alactic system. Okay. Now we have the lactic system. It's a little bit tricky, okay? And again, we have to move fast. We'll talk later about, if you want more information about this stuff. But the basic idea with the anaerobic lactic system is that it provides energy for sustained high intensity actions. What do I mean by sustained? And keep in mind, I'm speaking about this as the alternative or the antithesis, let's say, of short duration. What do I mean by sustained high intensity actions? Somebody tell me in the chat here. Don't be shy. Another few seconds. If I don't get an answer, I'll just tell you. Okay, repeating. John Michael says long sprints, cycling, running, swimming. Okay, so Andrew says cycling, running. So we're gonna think here. We're talking about soccer. So we got to let's forget about those other modes of exercise. So sustained high intensity. So long sprint. I think Max Henry, you've kind of got it. Okay, and John also, I think you've kind of got it about repeating. So the basic idea is it would have to be some period in a game. These happen. You understand that they do happen. Some period in the game where you don't quite have enough rest between each run or sprint, or maybe you're sprinting and running for a very long period of time. And because it's sustained, it means you end up kind of having to switch over, right? Switch over to the anaerobic lactic system. So Gyro says constant movement. That's the idea, transition movements. I'll give you one, I'll try to paint a quick mental picture for you guys, just hopefully this helps. Pressing as a team, if you don't win the ball right away and it lasts more than a couple of seconds, pressing is a good example of a sustained high intensity action. I hope that makes sense to you. You can imagine what starts to happen if you do press as a team and you don't win the ball right away. I mean, you might back off if you're, that's your strategy. But if you decide to keep it going, okay, yeah, transition moments, Max, you've got it, yeah. So that's the idea, okay? So these moments do happen in soccer, not all the time, but they do. And it's the anaerobic lactic system that provides energy. So really, when we're thinking about, training, we got to think about if it's short duration with enough rest, it's the alactic system. And if it's sustained high intensity activity, okay, that means longer period of time without as much rest, then you're going more anaerobic lactic. And finally, we have the aerobic system, and that provides energy for recovery in between high intensity actions. In the sport of soccer, all three of these systems are active all the time. I gave you this little Venn diagram here just to give you an idea that it's quite rare that you're going to look at any moment in the game and say, well, that player is working 100% anaerobically, or that player is working 100% aerobically. They're all active all the time. It's just the percentage of the energy that's contributed by each system that changes a little bit. And I'm going to ask, I see, a couple of chats coming in here. So I'm going to ask if anyone can think of what happens if you have a soccer player on your team and their aerobic system is poor. What happens in terms of their ability to recover? If their aerobic system is poor, they're not well trained, what happens? Here we go. Yeah, they'd be weary during the game, cramping, out of breath. Okay, I think we're getting the basic idea is that that's a player who at some point is going to become so fatigued that they cannot run as fast anymore. And at that point, they're probably going to have to be substituted, especially if we're getting into the higher levels. You can't have players on the field with a weak aerobic system because they won't recover well. And if they don't recover well, at some point, they're going to get exposed. Right? I mean, maybe you can hide them somewhere in the middle of the field or something, but it's not ideal. Okay, and then of course, if you have players that aren't as strong anaerobically, maybe those are the ones that can't quite run as fast and can't quite jump as high. And again, all things being equal, okay, because this is a separate discussion that can go for hours, but all things being equal, I'm going to suggest to you, you have your own opinions, I'm sure, but I'm going to suggest to you that all things being equal, you would probably prefer a player who can run faster over a player who cannot run faster. Do you agree with me? If everything else is equal. Alan, do you agree? Yes? Okay, good. All right, so I'm glad you agree. We can't argue on this point now because or else we're going to run out of time. So these are the three systems. They're all three involved, of course, in the sport, okay? Now, this is the activity pattern. I really want you guys to burn this into your head so you don't forget it. Okay, because this is the way soccer looks. It's the way testing for soccer should look. and it's the way training for soccer should look. It's the way the game looks, it's the way testing should look, and it's the way training should look. And this is the pattern. Sprint, rest, sprint. That's the pattern. Okay, we'll say more on that later, but just remember that. Soccer, and by the way, not just soccer, but actually all sports, here we're talking about soccer, all sports involve that. Some high intensity action, sprint, fast run, something. Then a rest period, and then another high intensity action again, and repeat that cycle over and over and over. That's the way it looks. That's the way your training should look. That's the way your testing should look, and because that's the way the game looks. Okay, so now, here's my question for you. We've got two examples getting into more of the planning. Okay, we're looking at 2 weeks of training. On the left, we have one model where the intensity or load is very high every day. On the right, we have another model where there's sort of more of a wave-like pattern going, you know, from one day to the next, up and down a little bit. Which one do you prefer and why? Speak to me in the chat and let me know. Come on. Let's see. Somebody, you have to be brave a little bit. Okay. Second one, right? It provides variations. Second chart. Okay. Yeah, we got it. All right. So you're on the right track here. Okay. Again, this is a bit of an oversimplification, but absolutely it's the one on the right. Okay. Remember we talked about kind of progressive overload. What you've got here throughout the week is you've got days in the week where the load or the intensity is lower. And that is what allows you to recover. That's what allows you to recover. So this model on the right here, this is a general idea of how you want your week to look. I'm going to show you a specific way where you're even going to be able to calculate the load. So it's not, you know, an abstract thing. We're going to get into, you know, how to do this. Okay. But that's the idea. Weeks in soccer should look like this one on the right. And I know, you know, like John Michael, I know, you know, he played university soccer in the States, and I think probably a few of you also did. You know, just tell me, John Michael, did your typical weeks look like the one on the right or the one on the left? Sometimes. I can tell you what it was like for me. Yeah, okay, you had to prep for the upcoming game. So that means maybe things evolved a little bit since I was in school. But I honestly can tell you that, you know, there were several years of university soccer where the first couple of weeks of preseason looked like this. Okay, and more or less everybody who didn't get hurt at the end of that became the starting 11 for the game. So things have evolved. That's good. But we have to understand that's the way it has to look. Okay, and I'll finish it. Who's saying in the chat here? Yeah. On the right, hell at the beginning. There you go. Okay. All right. Good. So I'm glad. Okay. There's a limit to 2 high load training sessions every week. If your plan incorporates consistently more than 2 high load days throughout the week, your risk of overtraining is going to go up. You have to keep that in mind. Okay. And as much as possible, you want as many days as possible in between those 2 high loads. So even this model looks like, you know, between day 6 and day 1 there, you might even want to spread it out. So you have a high load, maybe it's a game, and then a couple of days where the load is lower. Then maybe on Wednesday in the middle of the week, you have another high load, and you balance it out that way. So that's the idea. No more than 2, because if you do, then you may run into problems with sickness and injury. So let's move on. We're going to talk again. This is the best model that exists right now for soccer based on the science of periodization and the way soccer looks. It's called non-linear. So the basic idea, you can kind of see the little graph on the bottom, but the basic idea is that you've got an undulating or a wave-like pattern of intensity, okay, and volume. We'll talk about what those are in a little bit, okay? But you can alter frequently, and you can train multiple energy systems in the same week. Okay, Wellesley says it depends on the cycle. Both can be done, right? Depends on what period. All right. Yeah. Okay. In general, we have to make sure that we limit to two days per week. That's what I want you to keep in mind, though. Okay, 2 high load days, not more. Okay. So you can do in this model. Okay, you can do lighter loads more often, and typically what that does is that allows for more recovery. Okay, so you have a decreased risk of injury, and it's ideal for soccer. I'm just going to repeat this so we're clear on this, that in this model, you can train all three energy systems in the same week or the same cycle. Why is that important? Because how many energy systems do you use in soccer? We talked about it. How many do you use? 1, 2, or 3 in soccer? How many do you use? Somebody, speak in the chat and tell me, right? You have to understand this, right? Yeah, so we understand, Max, John, okay, you use all three, and because you use all three in the game, you have to make sure that you pay some attention to all three of those systems in your training. You cannot neglect it. You cannot go through a long period of time, certainly not a whole cycle, okay, where you don't do any aerobic training, because if you do, your aerobic fitness is going to go down, and then your performance is going to go down. So that's why this model makes sense. Well, hopefully by the end of this, hour and a half, we're going to have a bit of a better idea of exactly how to do this. But this is the model, okay? And it's because you train all three systems in the same week or the same cycle. All right, let's go on to fitness assessment. This one, we'll move a little bit quickly through here, and I will, at the end of this, I'll provide you with a link to some more information. But we have to understand now, okay, we got another quote though, because we have to understand why it's so important for fitness assessment. So I'll tell you already, I didn't say this one. I wish I did, but I didn't come up with it. This is a brilliant one. If you don't know where you're going, you'll wind up someplace else. Who said this one? Anybody? I'm seeing in the chat here. No, not Richard. I said I didn't say this one, so I cannot take credit for more than one of these quotes. No. Anybody? 5 more seconds. Yogi Berra. Andrew, did you look that up? That's the problem with doing these things online. I'm sure. Or did you know it, Andrew? Be honest with me. You did not. Okay, you knew. Yeah, so that's great. I'm glad you knew. It's great. Yogi Berra, not a soccer player, baseball player, but also a great baseball player, actually. He was with the Yankees I think in the 1950s and won a bunch of World Series, but he was also a very funny guy. And so there's some humor in this for sure. It's kind of a funny quote, but it's not just a joke. It's actually, I think it's really relevant to the idea of fitness assessments. If you don't know where you're going, you'll wind up someplace else. I'm going to add to that and say, if you don't conduct valid and reliable assessments of your players' fitness, if you don't measure their fitness, there's no way for you to plan. You're going to end up someplace else. Because if you don't conduct valid and reliable assessments, you don't know where you're going. So again, I'm going to challenge you again, because we understand now we are all fitness coaches in this game. You have to include testing into your plan. You have to. Don't say you're too busy. Don't say, and I'll tell you, also don't say that it's expensive, because I'm going to show you some ways that you can do it for free. Okay? You have to make time for it. Because if you don't, you're going to wind up someplace else. So I hope we're clear on that. Okay, moving quickly. These are the criteria that make a good fitness assessment. Number 1 is validity. It answers the question, does the test measure what it is supposed to measure? In soccer, do you run 100 meters or do you run distances that are shorter? What do you think? In soccer. We understand, shorter, right? Okay, very good, right? So if you were to use a test of 100-meter speed to measure speed in soccer, it probably is not the most valid test, because the running you do in soccer is shorter and so on. And we'll speak about that, how that relates to testing for for speed and for endurance and things like that. Validity means, does the test measure what it is supposed to measure? And you want to try to be as specific as possible with that. I'm giving you my suggestions here, okay, for what tests to use. Okay, reliability answers the question, is the data or score generated consistent? That means even if you run the test multiple times, will you get a similar score? So if there's any test that you're doing and it fails in terms of reliability, meaning you do it many times, you try it, and the scores are all over the place, they're not consistent, that means the test is not reliable, it is not a good choice. You cannot make comparisons between one player and another, nor can you make comparisons between a player's score previously and then later on if the reliability isn't there. We have to be very clear on that, okay? Finally, reproducibility is a simple concept. can the test be reproduced in the same way multiple times? I say this also, you know, I'm involved in fitness and strength and conditioning, and I see all these bizarre things with cones and hurdles everywhere and obstacle courses and all that. You know, okay, maybe that works for training, but for testing, it's difficult because it's difficult to reproduce. So you have to have that in mind. You want tests that are valid, that they measure what they're supposed to measure. You want tests that are reliable, means they give consistent scores, and that they are easily reproducible. And I'll say the last one, this is an asterisk because it's sort of it's a caveat, or it's just a kind of something that's in addition to reproducibility. You also want to think about ease of use. Is it practical to set up and administer in your environment? You know, all of it, and I can say even me too, I'm not working in the pro game now. We don't have always the best facilities available to us. We don't always have lots of space, lots of equipment, etc. So ease of use, you know, it kind of speaks to reproducibility, right? You have to do something that's practical for you. Okay, so I hope we understand these concepts. Here are my suggestions. Okay, these are what we use with soccer fitness. Been doing it for almost 15 years now at every level, from youth all the way up to the national team and professional clubs here in Canada and overseas. Okay, and it's also what we use with best athletes. And I think you saw in your email, all of you that have registered for this course, right? You're gonna, if you want, you can take advantage of a discount where best athletes and myself can come out and run these tests for you. But this is the protocol that we use. Simple. There's 4 tests. The first is a 10-meter sprint. Why are we testing it? Remember, we're going to validity. 10 meters is the minimum average distance of a sprint in soccer. These are the short sprints. I'm sure you all can imagine there's a lot of short sprints that are performed in the game. 10 meters is the minimum average distance. This study, by the way, Andrzejewski, you're going to see it. It's was done in the Premier League 2013. Not, in my opinion, not the best league in the world. The best league everybody knows is the Italian Serie A, but this is also a very good league and lots of fast players in that league. Okay, it measures acceleration. That's the ability to run from a standing start. Okay, yeah, I knew I was going to get somebody upset about that comment. Okay, we are sprinters. Okay, all right, 20 meter. Why test it? Well, 20 meters is the maximum average distance. This study more or less found that the average distance of sprints in soccer was in the range of 10 to 20 meters. So by testing those 2 distances, you get the range, average, minimum to maximum, okay? And finally, 35 meters, that is the maximum total distance of a sprint in soccer. You almost never in the game, you can think about this, and I'll challenge you to find an example of you know, a player who sprints more than this distance. I mean at maximal speed. Not, you know, starting off, accelerating, and then hitting the half line and going. Okay, 35 meters is very close to the maximum total distance. So it doesn't really make sense to test distances longer than that. That's the protocol, 10, 20, 35 meters. You time it. You can see in my picture here, we use timing gates. Okay, they can be expensive. You know, they're not super expensive, but they can be. You could also use a stopwatch or your watch on your wrist. You might lose a little bit of reliability there, but it's still okay to do as long as you're the one that's using it. Don't ask others to do it, okay? And again, a watch is not expensive, it's free, anyone can do it, okay? That's to test speed. And the final test, valid, reliable, reproducible, the best test of aerobic fitness for soccer or any other sport. It's called the yo-yo intermittent recovery test. I'm sure all of you, your players, if they do it, they love it. You run back and forth many, many times until you feel sick, and then you keep running more. So what is it? Why use it? Because it's valid, it's reliable and reproducible. It's been proven with over, I would say over 10 years, almost over 15 years of research now. Okay, since the mid 2000s. It's very easy to set up and use. Okay, Alan says, what are my thoughts on the Cooper test? So we got to go back to validity, Alan, and that's where I'll give you my opinion. So the yo-yo test, if we understand what it is, you have 2 cones 20 meters apart. There's a beep, you run to one cone, beep, run back to the first cone, third beep, you get 10 seconds of rest. Do you remember, Alan, sprint, rest, sprint? Do you remember that, Alan? So the reason that the yo-yo test is much more valid for soccer is because it looks more like soccer. It has a fast run and a rest. And the problem with the Cooper test, it will tell you a bit about the player's aerobic fitness, but it's not as valid to soccer because it's not as specific to soccer, because the Cooper test is just 12 minutes. It's continuous. It's not intermittent. The yo-yo test is intermittent, and it's why, I'm going to highlight this here for you, but you can see, intermittent is in the name of the test. It's literally measuring a player's ability to recover in between intermittent exercise. So my choice is that test rather than the Cooper test for that reason. I hope that answers your question. In the chat here. Yeah, cool. Okay. All right, good. Okay. I'll provide some links at the end if you want more information about how to do this, including, my course, which is available online. It teaches you everything you need to know about how to run this test. Again, as I said, we're moving quickly through this stuff. Okay. What does it measure? I think we spoke about this already, but it's a measure of high intensity running ability, the amount of fast running that a player can do in a game. This is just one study I'm showing you here. Again, almost 15 years ago, but shows that it's very well correlated to the distance covered at high intensity in a game. I've seen this with my own research, again, in the women's national team. Sometimes we look at the players' tests and we look at how much they run in the game, and it's literally almost exactly the same. It's a very, 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 very valid, very, very reliable measure of fast running. And if players do more fast running in a game, you can be guaranteed that physically they're going to perform better. Doesn't mean they maybe just not be a good player and make bad decisions or whatever, but physically, the more fast running you can do in a game, the better. And you want your players, when you train them, to be able to improve the amount of fast running they can do. So that's the protocol. Again, I'll give you some information after if you'd like to, looking into setting up something with best athletes. I'm happy to talk to you about that. And we'll move on from there. So here we go. Part 3 is training. Okay, and again, we're going fast through this, but hopefully you're getting some information that you can use. Okay, and again, before we start, we have to go to another quote. This is a great one, really simple. Okay, who said it? It's not me, and it's not Yogi Berra, definitely. Okay, and I'd like you to just think about it. I'll give you 10 seconds or so. Don't Google it. Don't go on the internet. I think we have a Brazilian in here that probably knows who said this. Oh, Guardiola. No, I may as well have been Guardiola, but no. Wellesley, you don't know? I thought you might know this one, Wellesley. Pelé, no. Well, it was a younger Brazilian, Romario. Okay, it's a great quote. Really interesting perspective. He was a guy that he didn't run a lot, but when he did run, he just scored goals, right? So he didn't need to run as much. But he said soccer is not running, and I just want we talked about that principle of specificity before. So I think this is a great simple quote to hopefully kind of hammer home that concept of specificity. Running training is helpful, but there's no way that running training can be as specific to soccer as playing soccer. I hope that you agree with me on that. And if you don't agree with me, then I hope at least you agree with Romario. Okay, one of the best strikers ever, I would say, at least in the 90s for sure. Okay, so think back to the activity pattern. How do we train? Remember the activity pattern: sprint, rest, sprint. You can train all 3 energy systems. The anaerobic alactic system, and remember that's short duration, high intensity. The anaerobic lactic system, and remember that's sustained, high intensity. And the aerobic system, recovery in between high intensity actions or exercise. You can train all 3 using this model. You just have to manipulate the sprint and the rest. And by manipulating those variables, and I'll explain how in a minute, right? But by manipulating those variables, then you can target one specific system rather than the other ones, okay? I hope this makes sense. We're gonna have a little look at some of the details now, okay? But that's the idea. All your training should look like this, okay? Definitely, I don't know who, I think it wasn't Max. Who was it that asked me about the Cooper test? Alan, right? Yeah, definitely Alan. If your training looks like the Cooper test, there's something wrong there. There's no specificity there. So I hope we're clear on that. Okay, So let's have a look at each system in a little bit more detail. So the aerobic system, and remember, this is the system that provides energy for recovery. It's actually measured by the yo-yo test, okay? Here are the ways you can manipulate the sprint or the high intensity period. You can play 30 seconds up to 10 minutes. It's a long range. 30 seconds to 10 minutes. Anywhere in between that is okay too. Could be 5 minutes, could be 2.5 minutes, 8 minutes, okay? Small-sided games. I also put technical exercises, but I really want to highlight for you here that really what you want to focus on more for the aerobic system is small-sided games. Why? Somebody tell me why, based on a principle that we've discussed earlier. Why should you focus on small-sided games for the aerobic system? Why? Who's in the chat here? Specificity, John Michael, you got it, okay? It's very difficult for you to come up with any type of technical exercise that has the same level of specificity as a small-sided game. Just look at the picture there, okay? You've got a player striking the ball, you've got defenders in his way, you've got teammates, you've got opposition, you cannot replicate that with technical exercises. Of course, you cannot replicate that with running. So small-sided games are the way. And remember now, the very first quote, what was it? Right at the beginning, what did we say? Is there only one way to do it? No, right? The very first quote, we said it's an art, Wesley. There's 1,000, maybe there's even 1 million, who knows? There's 1 million ways to play small-sided games. There isn't just one way. But you have to understand, the variables that you're working with and how to manipulate them. So these are just, again, suggestions, okay? Here's some ways you can do it. The intensity, it needs to be moderate to high. RPE, that stands for rating of perceived exertion. We're going to get to that when we talk about monitoring in a few more minutes, okay? But this is the rating of perceived exertion. How intense the players found the training, it has to be 7 to 8 out of 10. Meaning the players have to feel or experience the level of intensity of the game as being 7 or 8 out of 10. I like that scale, rating of perceived exertion, which goes from 0 to 10. 0 is rest, 10 is maximal. And the reason I like it, especially when working with athletes, is because what does 7 out of 10 represent? That's easy for an athlete to understand. Somebody tell me. You play a small-sided game, let's say you play for 4 minutes and you rest for 2 minutes and you do it, 4 times or whatever. At the end of that, I ask you, how hard was it? And you say 7 out of 10. What does that number represent? It's very easy. It's intuitive. What does it represent? 70%, Gonzalo. Exactly. That's the idea. 7 out of 10 is easy for anyone to understand. It was 70%. It was 75. You can do 0.5 if you want, right? It was 80%. It was 50%. So that's the idea. The games you play at the end, when you ask your players, this is monitoring. We're jumping ahead to part 4. But when you ask your players, how hard was that workout? It needs to be a 7 or an 8. If it's lower, then you're going into undertraining. Something was wrong. Maybe the field was too big, maybe too small. Maybe you didn't play long enough. Maybe you stopped and coached and talked too much in the game and they rested too much. Whatever it is, something was off. Okay, that's the intensity you want. And now we're going to talk about how to manipulate the rest. There is this thing called work to rest ratio, WRR. Somebody please explain, what does that mean? Because all of your training has to be built around this ratio. What does it mean? Work to rest ratio. It's a simple concept, right? I mean, the definition of it is literally in the name. What does it mean? Interval training. Okay, yeah, but you got to be more specific than that. Okay, Gonzalo. Yeah, Gonzalo's got it. He says, how much time you're in the activity versus resting. The work, that's the time that you're working, playing, right? And the rest is the time that you're resting. So I'm telling you, right? Okay, again, it's an art, not a science, but these are the scientific principles. You want your work to rest ratio to be somewhere between 1 to 1 up to 3-1. As an example, okay, and I'll use, Gonzalo, because, he answered it right. So, okay, so Gonzalo, if you play, a simple example, but if you play for 4 minutes and your work to rest ratio is 1-1, how long do you rest for? 4. Got it. Okay. What if, your work to rest ratio is 2-1? You play for 4. How long do you rest for? 2-1? He said 8. Ah, got it. 2. Okay, John Michael. Yeah. So if your work to rest ratio is 2-1 and you play for 4, then you have to divide that number in half. So you rest for only 2. So the work to rest ratio, if you want to train the aerobic system, okay, John Michael, you got it. If you want to train the aerobic system, you have to keep the ratio between work time to rest time somewhere between 1-1 and 3-1. If you start resting more, especially if you're playing longer games, like games that last for 5 minutes or 6 minutes and so on, if you start resting more, you're not going to overload the aerobic system the way you need to in order to stimulate adaptations. Go back to the principle of overload. That's why. And remember, what's the target? I mean, I've said it to you, but I want you to make sure we're clear on this. The target at the end of a session that's training the aerobic system is that you have an RPE that the players tell you that they found the session to be a 7 or an 8 out of 10, 70, 80%. It has to be high, okay? If it's not high intensity, it's not going to help. All right, so let's move on. And I'll say, it's almost 3 o'clock. As I said, I want to go till 3:30, and there's questions on the way. I like to try to finish in the next 15 minutes or so we can have lots of questions. Please, feel free if you've got any questions. I know there's a lot of information being thrown at you here, okay? But that's the aerobic system, so we'll move on. The rest can be active or passive. Active, that means, it's something, they're moving. Maybe they're doing keep-ups. Maybe they're stretching. Maybe they're doing some core exercise. There's different things you can do. Or passive, well, what does passive mean? Passive just means rest, catch your breath. Okay, they might just need to do that. Get some water and wait, okay? It's up to you. For the aerobic system, rest can be active or passive. Okay, let's talk about the anaerobic lactic system. This is the trickiest one. In the courses I teach, getting coaches to plan sessions for this system is probably the hardest. Okay, and I don't know if any of you have taken my course, maybe you might remember that. But, okay, so the sprint variables, again, back to that same model, sprint, rest, sprint. All 3 systems are trained the same way. You just manipulate the variables. So the time is 10 to 90 seconds. It has to be longer than 10 seconds because if it's shorter than 10 seconds, you're not really going to accumulate a lot of lactic acid. And that goes back to physiology. Okay, we're not really talking about physiology here, but the basic idea is you need sustained high intensity exercise longer than 10 seconds, up to 90, so up to 1.5 minutes. Again, small-sided games or technical exercises. This is one where you actually can train the system fairly easily with a technical exercise or small-sided games. You can do either one. Okay, it's up to you. Remember, it's an art, not just a science. You can do either one. Okay, let's talk about intensity now. Okay, the movements must be 100%. What do I mean by the movements that you do in the exercise must be 100%? What does it mean? RPE 10. Okay, so John Michael, I want to be clear. When you speak about, or when we speak about this type of training, we have to differentiate between the movements in the session and the RPE, which speaks about the whole session as a whole. So you're on the right track with that, but you're thinking ahead. I want you to tell me about the specific movements. So let's just say, I talked about pressing. So let's say you're training your team to press, and it's you really want to push them. Okay. So you're going for longer, longer than 10 seconds. So Ludovic says full sprints each time. Ludovic, you're absolutely right. What I mean by that, yeah, sprinting, lots of change of direction. We got it. So the key is for this type of training to stimulate an adaptation, they have to run as fast as they can. Ludovic says it, full sprints every time. If you come up with an exercise and the players do not sprint as fast as they can every time and sustain it, this system will not improve. It's very difficult to do. Any of you who's ever experienced sprinting for longer than 10 seconds, you know what I'm talking about. It's quite challenging. That's why I say this is the trickiest one of the three to train, because you need a sprint and it needs to be 10, 20, 30 plus seconds. Okay, it's not easy to do. And then now, John Michael, we get into what you were speaking about, which is the RPE. Well, you're right, John Michael. The RPE also needs to be very high or maximal, 9 to 10. It needs to be close to 10 out of 10. This training is uncomfortable. This is the kind of training, and you know that lactic, that implies that you're producing lactic acid. How does lactic acid make you feel if you have a lot of it in your body? How do you feel? Heavy legs, you got it. Heavy legs, you're going to be breathing very heavy. You're going to feel, you almost feel like you have to throw up sometimes. It's not, and I'm not, I hope you keep in mind, I'm not telling you I want you to train your players so they get sick and throw up, but you have to be conscious of, that this is sustained high intensity exercise. Also, why you can't do this all the time. Okay, we go back to our, our planning, right? Not more than once a week for sure. Okay, so that's the idea. Okay, and now we get into the rest. Well, it's got to be 30 seconds up to 10 minutes. So it's a a much greater work to rest ratio, and it better be passive. Okay, you certainly don't want to have them do any type of sustained high intensity exercise and then active rest where they're moving. They're going to need to catch their breath. Let them, they don't need to sit down, but let them stand, let them drink their water, let them just rest in between. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to you and the difference between the aerobic and the anaerobic lactic system. And finally, we've got the anaerobic alactic system. Okay, this one's more fun. 1 to 10 seconds, short duration. Again, this has to do with the physiology. Okay, and keeping in mind most actions in soccer are much shorter than 10 seconds, so it's easy to make it specific. You can see the picture at the bottom. It's a 1v1. It's a great way to train it. Okay, 5 to 40 meters. Why am I suggesting, in terms of distance, that you don't do more than 40 meters in a high intensity action? Why? Think back to what we talked about, with testing and validity. Specificity, you got it. Yeah, players don't run more than that, Ludovic. Okay, so if you're setting up some type of an exercise that's forcing players to run, it's got to be somewhere between 5 and 40 meters. And even 40 is kind of long. Like, you got to go on the shorter end of that, right? And the time duration, of course, if you're only sprinting 10 meters, well, you're only sprinting for about, 1.5 to 2 seconds. That's the way it goes. Okay, so the time is short, the distance is short. The intensity, okay, it's the same. It's got to be 100%. In my courses, I talk a lot about using competitions. 1v1 is a good example. 2 players competing, racing for a ball, racing for something to get to a cone first or whatever it is, right? That forces them to run fast. It's much better than isolated running on its own, and it goes back to specificity. The overall activity, though, has to be moderate. 4 to 6 out of 10, 40 to 60%. Why not more? Somebody tell me why the overall activity, the RPE of alactic training should not be higher than 6. Tell me why. Compare it to the lactic system. Tell me why the RPE here has to be a little bit shorter, lower. Yeah, okay, John Michael, you got it. If you do, by definition, if the intensity starts to go higher than 6, closer to 7, 8, all of a sudden now you're tapping, and you're absolutely right. You're ending up tapping into the lactic system specifically. You're going to start producing a lot of lactic acid, and then, John Michael, what happens to the quality of the sprinting? Can players run as fast as they can over multiple repetitions if they're tired? No. So the quality goes down. If you want players to improve speed, if that's the goal, right, you want to improve the performance of those short duration, high intensity activities, you need to give them enough rest. And I think Peter said it too, right? Longer rest periods. You need longer rest periods. And because you have longer rest periods, right, then they can recover and they can move faster in the end. And that's the idea. So the rest variables, right? 10 seconds to 2 minutes. What does that imply? Like if you do the math, it implies a work to rest ratio of 1:5 up to 1:10. So you get lots of rest in between each run. And keeping in mind, the runs are short. So you could rest for do a quick 2-second sprint, rest for 20 seconds. It sounds like a lot, but that's what you need in order to avoid fatigue and lactic acid. And the mode also, it needs to be passive. Also, because the durations are fairly short, you're not even really going to have time to do much else with it. Okay, so hope that makes sense to you. Let's move on. Okay, we're at the final phase here, putting the pieces together. This is a complicated one, and then we can talk a little bit about, sports recovery tracker and what you guys can do with it. Okay, and we got a final quote here. This is a great one. Okay, no plan survives contact with the enemy. Who said it? Five seconds. Churchill. Oh yeah, so many people always guess Churchill, but it's may as well have been Churchill, but before his time. Okay, so this is Helmut von Moltke, German general in the First World War. The First World War. Okay, want to be clear on that. Who? Helmut von Moltke. Okay, he was one of the top generals in the German army in the First World War. And I think this quote has been credited to many other people as well. But as far as I know, he's the first one to say it. And it's brilliant. And I want to say the reason I like it so much is because it speaks to the importance of monitoring what you do. We've talked about planning. Planning is important, right? We know that it's important. Why is monitoring important? Because not everything you do goes according to plan. There are enemies. And in the context of planning, enemies are not the opponents. They're not people on the other side, shooting at you. In the context of soccer, enemies are things like scheduling problems, like COVID and all of the, field cancellations and lockdowns, players being injured, and so your numbers get messed up, rain, weather, facilities, etc. I hope we all understand that. Those are your enemies, and those are the things that interfere with your plan. And then remember, I'm going to ask, okay, Max, right? Because Max answered the question. So do you think that, let's say you plan and you want a training session to be 8 out of 10? Do you think it's always going to be 8 out of 10 just because you want it to be that way, Max? Obviously not, right? That's the idea, because maybe you made a mistake, right? Maybe, as I said, your field size was too big. Maybe you put, you used 4v4, but maybe the technical ability of the players wasn't quite good enough. They lost the ball too much, whatever, right? Or maybe it was even higher than you wanted it to be. So no matter what, okay, without, monitoring what happened, without monitoring it, you don't really know. And what ends up happening is you're kind of working blind. The analogy would be maybe, you bury your head in the sand and you say, okay, we're just going to stick to the plan, and that's not good, right? Then you get killed, okay, in this analogy. So that's the idea. That's why I like this quote. Hope it makes sense to you. Okay, so let's move on. What do we track? Well, I talked already about rating of perceived exertion from 0 to 10. That's your scale. Okay, and tonight I'm going to send you a little PDF with these documents so you'll have them. Okay, but it's, as I said, it's so simple you almost don't need a scale. You can just tell players 0 is rest, 10 is maximal. How hard was your session from 0 to 10? So training load, okay, training load is the product of volume multiplied by intensity, V multiplied by I. And in this equation, what is volume? That's the training time in minutes. And intensity is the RPE from 0 to 10. That's how it's calculated. And what we're doing for you in this course is we're actually providing you with free access to our new app, Sports Recovery Tracker, that does these calculations for you. So all you need to do is collect the information with your teams. We're going to make it as easy as possible to do this. This product came out of my experience teaching this stuff for, 5-6 years and seeing how, okay, what was the best way to optimize collecting this data. Okay. And aside, for you, it's free. We're only charging $1 a month. It's not expensive, but in any case, for you guys, it's free. So I want to ask you now, how do you calculate volume? If you practice from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m., is your volume 120? Here's where we got to be specific about this, because this is the one thing that I'm going to rely on you for in order to look at your data. Okay. So yeah, Jairo says no, Alan says no. Okay, you got it, right? What's your volume? Practice for 2 hours. Define volume to me. Okay, Max, yeah, you got it. Okay, we got it, Max. Number of exercise minutes or playing time, okay? So this is the way you do it. You have a stopwatch, or like if you got your assistant coach or whatever, or manager, let somebody take a stopwatch, start the watch when the players start moving or warming up, and stop it every time there is a water break or a change to a different exercise or whatever. At the end, you're going to get a number. It might be 60 minutes, it might be 75, it might be whatever, right? Like that, it depends. But that's the idea. Volume is training time in minutes, and it's multiplied by intensity from 0 to 10. That's the way it's calculated. So for you, when you use Sports Recovery Tracker, one of you on the field, coach, assistant coach, manager, whoever, is going to measure the training time. And then you are going to, okay, so Gonzalo, players and athletes need some time to dominate the scale. Yeah, okay, they might not be accurate. Yeah. So Gonzalo, you're right. Okay, so you can almost think of that word. So he's saying players need time to, to get the accuracy right. You can call it a learning effect. So they have to learn, what does it really mean to be 7 out of 10 and so on. So my thoughts, honestly, is you just have to do it a lot with your team. So maybe the first few times you do it, the accuracy isn't as good as it should be. But if you have players that you're working with for several months, or at least for one whole season or one whole year, eventually then, you'll get the accuracy down. So I agree with you, but, of course, we have to work with what we can. This was created, I just want to, highlight this, that it was created because I wanted to eliminate all of the barriers to doing this, to make it as easy as possible. I know, okay, from my own experience, that it is difficult to have to chase players down with a clipboard and ask them what their RPE was every day. I've done it. I did it for years. It's a pain. Sometimes you forget. Sometimes they run away and go home or whatever, right? Okay. And working with the data, like if you like it, it's fine, but it's time consuming. So we created this product. This is the way you do it. You count the volume, and the players have access to the app, either on their phone or computer or whatever, and they go in and they enter their own RPE. They can do it after training or at night or whenever. And of course, you're going to tell them what the volume was because you're counting it. I hope that makes sense to everybody. Okay, but that's how it's calculated: volume multiplied by intensity. We're going a little over. I know it's almost 3:15. I hope everybody's okay. We'll do the best we can, but really I want to make sure we give this stuff enough time rather than rushing through it. So okay, oh, we got those two little circles on the field. Let's get those balls off the field. Okay, all right. So frequently asked questions with regards to training load. This is what they are. What's a good training load? How can I progress from week to week? And how can I progress from phase to phase? Okay. So first of all, there's no such thing as good or bad. Can't answer that question. But here's your standard. Use the game as a standard or benchmark. Of course, we understand that a game, the volume is going to be 120 because the game is 90 minutes and the warm-up is typically about 30. It might be a bit less. So the highest volume you can have in a normal game that does not go into extra time is 120. And the RPE, or the intensity, should be 10. Therefore, okay, does anyone who's good at math, that can tell me what's the training load for a game with volume of 120 and RPE of 10? What's the training load? All right, hoping somebody got it. You got it. Okay, it's 1200. So the highest training load you can have, more or less, in soccer is 1200. That's your threshold. You don't want to, I mean, if that's the game and that's what you have for your players, you definitely don't want more than 1 day a week that's approaching that number. You don't. If you do, you're getting into the sickness and injury. Here's a sample. Go back to the model, right? The weekly model. It's just a sample week. Remember, it's an art, not a science. So you don't have to follow this exactly, but this is the sample. Monday is a recovery day. Let's say it was after the game. The volume is only 30 minutes, okay? The intensity, or RPE, is 4, and therefore the training load is 30 times 4, or 120. It's a short, it's a low training load day. Tuesday, you focus on the aerobic system. You played some small-sided games. The volume was 60 minutes. The intensity was 7. Your training load is 420. It's higher. You can see how we kind of have this wave pattern going already, right? Okay, Wednesday. It's the anaerobic lactic system as your focus. Remember, in the nonlinear model, you can train multiple systems in the same week, and that's because soccer uses multiple systems. So you have to train them, and this is a way you can do it with this model. Volume 70, intensity, RPE 9, because that lactic system is high. So there's your training load of 630. Question here. Wesley's got to leave. Oh, he's Brazilian. Okay, all right, you're in class. Okay, Wesley, you're welcome. By the way, guys, there's a video that's going to be of this session, and I'm going to send all of you the access to the video, and we'll put it up on YouTube privately for you guys. Okay, thank you. Okay, but yeah, as I said, I talk a lot, and sometimes we go over time, but that's okay. All right, we have to learn this stuff. Okay, even if it takes a bit longer. Okay, there's Thursday. Volume is 60. Intensity is only 5. Training load is down to 300. We can see what we did, right? Because we're building up to the game. So we probably had a game on Sunday here. Monday was recovery. Then we kind of built it back up. Now we're going back down. Alactic. Okay, oops. Friday, aerobic again. Volume is 50. Intensity is 7. Training load 350. Kind of the same. You know, it's sort of a low, moderate day. Saturday, the alactic system again. This isn't a model, by the way. It's like a professional university club, professional club or university team where you're training every day. You may not have this, but you know, if you do, this is a way to do it. Volume 40, intensity 4, training load only 160. It's very low the day before the game, and of course Sunday is the game, and we're gonna maybe assume it wasn't a maximal. It was average was a 9. So there it is. So I hope you can all see with this model, right, that that's what your week looks like. It's kind of wave-like. Did we train all 3 systems in this week? Yes or no? Did we train all 3 of them? I hope you say yes. Yeah, we did, Max, right? They're all there, okay? And there was a bit more of a priority given to the aerobic system and the alactic system because we trained those systems twice, whereas we trained the lactic system only once. Okay, you got it, all right? So good. So just one model. Remember, this is an art, not a science. There's 1,000 ways to do it. This is just one example how to do it, okay? This question about progressing training load. Well, we got to talk about the principle of progression. You make small incremental increases in volume or intensity. If you want to increase volume, you can add time, you can add number of reps. If you want to increase intensity, you got to do something to the game, something to the exercise, increase or decrease the field size. Shorten the rest intervals. Right away, by shortening rest, you're going to increase intensity, absolutely. Or you can add conditions to the games to make them harder. Maybe it's a game where the whole team has to be across the half line or in the attacking third in order to score. Whatever. There's again, it's an art. There's 1,000 ways to do it. These are just suggestions. Here's another, okay, for examples, you know, I'm giving you some links at the end of this to YouTube videos and stuff where we can show you how to do this if you want, okay? But here's a suggestion, and I hope, you know, just remember this, okay, that you are going to get better results if you focus more of your energy on finding ways to raise intensity rather than volume, okay? Volume is what ends up, you know, killing players. Is what ends up having, you know, a higher risk of injury. So it's okay to increase volume. Don't think that you can't do it, but it's better to try to keep volume, you know, within a certain range, not always to just keep adding reps and, oh, you know, we need to increase in training load, so we're just going to play for another 20 minutes. Or don't always do that. Find ways, rather than just going with volume all the time, find ways to increase intensity. I hope that makes sense to you. Okay. So we'll move on to the third, you know, little question. So sample month. Okay, this is, let's say if each week is a cycle, week 1, your training load in total might be 3,060. In week 2, you bump it up by, again, manipulating volume and intensity of your training. So you increase by 5%. Week 3, you go up to 3,373, another increase in 5%. And finally, in week 4, we can call that a deload or a kind of a tapering week. I know Max used that term. So this is what tapering is about decreasing the load. And so you can understand that's, this guy going up the stairs, each of those 3 weeks was a step. And then actually he took a bit of a step down at the end. So it didn't really look exactly like this. And then maybe in week 5, you could go even higher. That's kind of again, is an oversimplification, but with this product and with proper planning, you can do this. Okay. Finally, progressing from phase to phase, again, is a bit of an oversimplification, but I want to make sure that that you understand the basic idea. It's done with nonlinear periodization. You want to make sure you have training sessions each week or each cycle for each energy system, but you can shift the focus from one to the other within each phase. So maybe what that means is that in a particular week, you do 2 sessions. Let's just say you have 4 sessions. In 1 week, you do 2 aerobic, 1 anaerobic alactic, and 1 anaerobic lactic. And then in the next week, you have 4 sessions. You do 1 aerobic, 2 anaerobic lactic, and 1 anaerobic alactic, just as a simple example. But that's the way you can kind of progress from one phase or one cycle to the next. That's the way to do it, okay? And you can make small incremental increases in training load from one phase to the next, okay? So we'll wrap it up, and then I'll stay, if you guys have questions, of course. I don't want you to feel, like you have to run out or whatever. I don't, so you can stay, of course. Okay, we'll talk about this sports recovery tracker a little bit. First of all, I hope everybody got the email that I sent this morning. I gave you just some instructions about how to sign up. Basically, what you do is you go in, you create a free coaches account. Okay, at the bottom then of your screen, when you scroll down, you're going to see a team key, and then you're going to email your players that link that I gave you. It gives players free access, because normally players have to pay. Okay, but this gives free access for your players, and they have to then create their account and use your team key. And then they're going to start entering training load. And so the last little screen I'll show you is how to do that. But what are you tracking? Well, we've got this amazing statistic that's generated called the acute to chronic workload ratio. It's the ratio between the acute training load, that's the load for today, whatever it is, volume times intensity, and it's the ratio of that number to the chronic training load, which is the average training load from the past 3 weeks. And you can see on the little diagram here that there's what's called a sweet spot where the injury risk is lowest, and that's with an acute to chronic workload ratio of between about 0.5, maybe 0.75, up to about 1.75. We can say almost 0.5 to 1.5. That's the sweet spot. Okay, you don't need to do the math. The product does the math for you. All you need to do is make sure that your players track what they are doing. And that's how you get a graph that looks like the one on the right. This is, a sample of data for 3 weeks where you can see the ACWR, the acute chronic workload ratio. Does anyone notice a problem based on what we talked about today? Does anyone notice a problem with this graph on the right? If so, can you please tell me what it is? I'll give you 5 seconds. If not, I'm going to just tell you what it is. What happened around day 8? Big jump, right, Max? Okay. So why is this a problem, Max? Based on what we've learned today and what you hopefully you already know, right? Why is it a problem, Max? Yeah, okay, so you're throwing that ratio out of whack. Remember the analogy of the staircase. What you've done there is you've got you're asking your team to go from here to here. You're asking them to do a big jump. Okay, they're not quite prepared for it. Risk of injury goes up. Okay, so that's the idea there. Okay, so this again, this product will allow you to highlight when those things happen and hopefully to make changes if needed. Okay, seems to be handled correctly. You like that? Yeah, they dropped it back down, so that's good. Hopefully nobody got hurt there. Okay, all right, so let's move on. The product also tracks other qualities, okay, including recovery, hydration, and injury. In the website, there are videos that teach you how to do this stuff. This is a sample data with some of the best players from myself and the guy who built it with me. He's a Man United fan. I'm a Milan fan, so that's where you're going to see the names in there. So this is just sample data, okay? But that's it. So what I'm going to do now, just very, very quickly for you, is I'm going to stop here and I'm just going to share, once I open it up here, I'm going to share with you. Oh, what happened here? Okay. I'm going to open up Sports Recovery Tracker in a browser, and I'm going to share it with you so you can see exactly what it would look like once you sign up. So here's the home screen. Can everybody see this now? Can you all see Sports Recovery Tracker? Fantastic. Okay, great. So again, this was sent to you in your email, but just so we understand, so nobody's confused, right? So you're going to go to sign up, okay, which is in the middle here. You're going to click sign up, and then you're going to click coach, okay? And then you're going to put some information, email, etc., and agree, and then move on. Again, coaches' accounts are free, okay? So once you do that, now just obviously I'm not going to go ahead and sign up now, but I'm going to hit login, and I'm just going to show you. Okay, I'll go back to home. Yeah. Oh, okay. So I've logged in now. So this is my, our test account with all these great, legendary players. Of course, the Milan players are the best ones, but there's some Man U players that are pretty good too. Okay. And from your coach's account, if you scroll down, okay, this is on every page. Does everyone see this thing that says team key here? You see that? Yeah. Okay. You can see it in the chat. You can see it. Okay. So that's your team key. So you can, this is a document you can download. It's actually just instructions for, like you can download this PDF and you can email it to your players. So what you're going to do is you're going to email your players this document. You're going to give them their team key, which is unique to you. And you're going to give them that link that I sent you in the email. That's a unique link that will allow your players to create an account for free. Once they have all created an account, okay, then all you need to do is train them on how to track and enter their data. And that's done. I've scrolled back up here with fitness tracking here at the top. So when you click this, then it gives you a drop-down menu. I'm not sure, does the drop-down menu show up for you guys or no? I've clicked fitness tracking. Let's see. It does. Okay, fantastic. Okay, sometimes with Zoom, these things don't go. So training load. Okay, so when I hit fitness tracking and I go to training load, okay, now if you're a coach, you can enter any of your players, but if you're a player and you're doing this, they're only working with themselves. They're gonna label the activity, training, game, whatever. They're gonna enter their rating of perceived exertion from 0 to 10. You can see the drop down there. They're gonna then enter the duration, which you're gonna give them because you're gonna measure it, you or your assistant coach with a stopwatch, and they're going to enter the date. And at the end of all that, then they're going to click the add training load button, and that's it. Again, this is, I hope you guys like this. There's a lot of work that went into this, and the basic idea here is we've simplified this process as much as possible. If you want, you can track all of your players' data yourself. You would of course do that from your coach's account. If not, you can delegate, or whatever you want to call it. You can assign the responsibility to them. Okay, and then at the end of a particular training session, you're going to have the training load data for that session. And if you do it over multiple sessions, all of a sudden you start to get training load for the week, and eventually then you also start to get your acute chronic ratio once you've gone for 3 weeks. So again, we'll leave some time for question and answer, but I just want to I'm going to wrap it up there. So I'm going to share, we'll go back to sharing the presentation now. Okay, hope you all can see this. from current slide. Okay. So I'll wrap it up here. This PDF has a bunch of links with videos and articles that I've put out recently that give you a bit more information. And also I put the link to the National Soccer Coaches Association of Canada YouTube channel, where there's lots of, I've made lots of videos with examples of training sessions. So these are examples of training the aerobic system using small-sided games, anaerobic alactic speed competitions, and so on. They're there, but of course, remember, it's an art, not a science, so you can use my examples if you want. If not, you can create your own. Here's what I want you to do. Of course, you're going to set up your account in Sports Recovery Tracker. You're going to get your players on it. Do it as soon as possible. Do it today, do it tomorrow, do it before Easter, okay? As soon as you can. And then, in the next 3 weeks of training, I want you to use Sports Recovery Tracker to start to track the training load that you have in your training sessions, so that at the end of the 3 weeks, we've got our next lecture, which is Wednesday, April 21st, is exactly 3 weeks from today. You're gonna share your data with the group, and we're gonna review it, and we're gonna start to talk about, you remember that concept, right? That no plan survives contact with the enemy. We're gonna kind of get into, exactly what do you do with that data? And I think, again, this is a missing piece in this type of education. Lots of products exist out there, heart rate monitors and GPS and all that, but learning what to do with the data, in my opinion, is it's a missing piece. So we're going to hopefully, put all those pieces together, as I said. Okay, so that's me. If you want to get in touch with me, you can email me. You can check out, our website if you want more information. There it is. Okay, it's 3:30. As I said, if there's any questions right now, anybody, please feel free. I'll stick around. If not, if you got to go, thank you very much, and I'll look forward to seeing you on Wednesday, April 21st. Okay, so here's a question. Okay, Alan, COVID and forced virtual sessions. The data may not be true. Yeah. So I know, Alan. I don't know, I'm in York region, so I know some stuff has opened up here. I mean, our facility's open. There's some teams training on the field. I don't know. I'm going to knock on wood because I'm hearing about more lockdowns coming now. But when we originally scheduled this, we were really hoping that, by April, by the time the warm weather came and all that, maybe there would be more facilities open, teams allowed to train. If you're allowed to train, great. If not, yeah, you can use your virtual sessions or Zoom. I mean, in the end, it might not be pictures of a typical week, Alan, I agree with you, but if you get your players to report, right, get them to be diligent about it, you will collect data, and we can still look at that data, and it'll still give you some information. And if nothing else, you know what it does, Alan, even if it's not typical, this is the week that you're in, right? So at least it gives you the information from the week that you're in, okay? Okay, Andrew, if I've got data I've been collecting online going back, is there a value? Absolutely. Yeah, you've got a coach's account. If you've already, and I know, Andrew, I think, you took my course before online. So yeah, if you've already been doing it, absolutely put it in. The app works that way. It works with any data. I mean, as long as you enter the dates correctly, you're going to start to see that information being plotted. Absolutely, Andrew. Yeah. Don't be shy, all right? Feel free. Thanks for your time. Okay, Alan, great. Okay, so see you in 3 weeks. Okay, Max, question 1. How often would you measure it? Okay, so that's a great question. I'm glad it came up. Hopefully, those who are still listening. So, of course, at a minimum, you got to go at the end of the session. If you have the let's just say the capacity within your training to measure it at multiple times, Max, like if you make yourself a spreadsheet or you've got people helping, like if you want to do it multiple times and then you can take the average over the multiple times that you measure it, that's great. But that kind of thing might not be practical for everyone. So more or less my suggestion is, if you can do it that way, great. But if not, just make sure that it is done at the end of the session. And also keep in mind, if you're collecting it, of course, it's maybe a little easier or simpler for you to collect it at multiple times. It may not be so easy for a player. The system is only set up for you to enter one score. So my suggestion is, if you're delegating this to players, I wouldn't start asking, kids to calculate averages over multiple blocks, or yeah, so you understand, yeah. So 15 to 30 minutes after. Okay, so yeah, so okay, so hope that makes sense, Max. If you have the capacity to do it, great. If not, just do it once. Okay, Gonzalo, if you take right after the session, they might correlate to the last exercise. Yeah, it's not a bad idea. The way I explain it to players is I'll say, you have to think about the whole thing. And I know, yeah, you're right. They might just think, oh, if the last exercise was really hard, it's going to be higher. If the last exercise was really easy, it's going to be easier. I mean, that's a limitation to this model. Of course, this is the low-tech model. The high-tech model is, heart rate or whatever. So yeah, if you have some ability to wait, great. But also just explain to them, right? Because go back to that learning effect, Gonzalo, that we talked about. As long as players learn and they are honest, at some point, you're going to get the accuracy that you want. Great. Okay. All right. Question 2, why 35, not 30? So why 35 meters, not 30? And what about repeated sprint? Great questions, Max. Okay. So 35, it's not so different than 30, obviously, in terms of distance. It's only 5 meters more. And I'll tell you why I chose it, really, is because 35 meters is very, very close to 40 yards. 40 yards. And we use the metric system here, but we, typically, in Canada, we have a lot of athletes that are trying to go play in the States, and in the States, they use yards. So that 40 yard, maybe you've seen it, it's kind of a popular distance to test. It's very popular in, in American football, right? But even, in soccer, a lot of times the conditioning coaches will look at that. So it's the closest to 40 yards. That's really the reason. There's no advantage 30 versus 35. That's the reason. So for that, and then the last part of your question about repeated sprint testing, it's a great idea. Nothing wrong with doing it. We did not include it in our protocol for 2 reasons. The first reason is honestly time. Okay, because it means in addition to like those tests, the sprint and the yo-yo, they can be done in an hour with a team. If you add repeated sprint testing, you're getting into an hour and a half, 2 hours. It's a little bit less practical that way. The second, and this is, I actually co-authored a paper on this a long time ago, but it's something to think about. Often when you do repeated sprint testing, especially when you're working with younger athletes, they don't always push themselves as hard as they can in each sprint. And I'll tell you, maybe I'll ask you, Max, if you think about the physiology, does it make sense for any player to have a sprint, like to have their fastest sprint, not the first one? Does it make sense physiologically? Not really, right? Because physiologically, your fastest sprint should be your first, maybe your second, but typically, the first one should be the fastest because that's the one where you're not fatigued. And then after that, you should drop off a bit. Now, if you're in good shape, it'll level off, and if you're in bad shape, it'll just get slower and slower and slower. But this paper that we worked with academy players from age 12 to I think it was about 16. So they try to pace themselves. You understand the idea, yeah. So this is a common thing with repeated sprint testing with youth. Anyway, for those 2 reasons. One was time, and 2, because sometimes you lose the reliability because they pace themselves. Sometimes the fastest one is at the end, which makes no sense, right? But it's it's the way kids don't always do what they're supposed to do, right? So that's kind of the idea. So that's why, nothing wrong with it, but that's why we don't do it. So. Great. All right. Thank you. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. So if there's any other, as I said, if you got to go, I know it's almost 2 hours now. If you got to go, feel free. Okay, Peter. Okay, here in Canada, we have a longer preseason than a competition. Sometimes, right? Yeah, sometimes it's almost the same length. What implications does this have on fitness training? Okay, so basically what it means is that you don't necessarily need to consider the preseason and the competition season as being these 2 kind of isolated events. Already in a nonlinear model, you're probably going to be training all 3 systems in every phase and every cycle. So really, you can have maybe a small period of time at the beginning where you really do things differently. Maybe there's a huge focus on aerobic fitness, not too much lactic training, not too much speed training. Maybe even it's a little more general. But at some point in the middle of the pre-season, if that's April or middle of April or May at some point, then you really have to make that plan look very similar to what it will look like in the season. And also, I think a lot of times in your preseason you have games too, don't you, Peter? Yeah. So keeping in mind that the basic recommendation, not more than 2 high load days every week. So if you're in a preseason week and there's a game, well, that leaves only 1 other day for high load. The others need to be either moderate or low. And that's why I say it doesn't really change so much whether it's preseason or in season. And again, going back to, it's a bit of an oversimplification, but the basic idea with the science of periodization, it wasn't really designed for team sports like this. If you have a crazy week, I know, in Ontario often, you don't just get 1 game in a week, you get a cup game and a league game and then a makeup game and all that. But if you've got like multiple games in a week, then you don't even need to do any high load training days because you've already got it. So you just have to be conscious of those things. But I wouldn't really treat the preseason that differently beyond a certain point. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. Any other questions? I know a few people left. I saw Max had to go. Okay. Jairo, you're welcome. I'll give it another minute or so, and if there's no more questions, then we will wrap it up, and you can expect to see a couple of emails from me tonight. A little more information about best athletes, a little more information about the RPE and all that. So, okay, Alan, thank you very much. All right. Ciao from Peter. Okay. Okay, last chance. Going, gone. All right. Okay. Thank you guys so much again. I know we went a little over time, but hope this was really, really valuable for you. And I will, as I said, I'll send some communication later tonight, and I'll look forward to seeing you all in 3 weeks. All right.